If you have your chronological Bible with you this evening, and we'll be on page 1441. If you do not, we'll be in Mark chapter 11. Mark chapter 11. No, we'll be in Luke 19 if you don't have your chronological Bible. This is where it gets a little tricky. I got to look in the margin, and typically the one in bold print is the one they're directly quoting from. In the chronological Bible, it gets kind of squished together a little bit. Nah, I won't take the time to do it. I thought about going over a short list of the different things going on in our country that we probably wouldn't like and get us all kind of stirred up about it, get a little frown going, kind of get some emotion behind it. Because for most of us, there are things going on that would get us upset if we contemplate those things. But just think about that for a moment, about the kind of things that we know that's going on and the things that frustrate us. And my question is going to be, what is an appropriate way to respond or to feel about what's happening around us when we see godless people, worse, when we see those who may claim to be godless and are in fact those who claim to be following God but are in fact godless? I guess I'm going to have to slow down a second tonight and get my words to sync up with my brain. Because what really struck me in this reading in Luke 19, verse 41, in the paragraph where it says Jesus foresees destruction, it's the first time it really caught me and stopped me. You read along where Jesus, we read, as he approached Jerusalem and he saw the city, and going all the way back deep into the Old Testament, really even into the wilderness, when they're wandering through the wilderness, what do they spend 40 years doing? As the Hebrew writer would say, they spend 40 years murmuring and griping and complaining, and so just this long history of struggle. It's interesting that when Jesus sees Jerusalem, this city of peace, he weeps over it. And I'm struck again by the word weep, because I don't mind a little misty-eyed, maybe a tear or two, but to weep means to truly express a grief without restraint. It's literally to lose it. It's not contained. It's not pretty. And I have a little trouble wrapping my mind around this picture of Jesus looking at Jerusalem and not just, I can see him getting angry. That makes sense to me. I can see him rail against them and pronounce judgment, and he does in other places. And in one place, remember, he cleansed the temple, and he was pretty worked up about that. But when he sees the city of peace filled with a people who do not know their God, he weeps. That takes a while. That's not a passing comment. There's a stop, there's a pause. He wept over it, and he said, if you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you to peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. I had a friend, a brother, an unusual kind of fellow, and he used to say it this way, if you're going to tell somebody they're going to hell, can you at least have a tear in your eye when you say it? You know what I mean? Compassion. This is not a good thing. This idea that people are going to be lost. This is not, yeah, they're going to get theirs, they deserve it, it's justice. This is a reason to weep. Because that's how Jesus feels about it, and that's how the Father feels about it. No one was created with the intention that they would spend eternity in hell. God desires all that would repent and come to salvation, but as Jesus sees Jerusalem, he weeps over it. If you had only known. He continues, the days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. And they'll dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone upon another because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. He's talking about, specifically in their immediate context, in AD 70, God will allow Rome to come and destroy Jerusalem. It's interesting even that he will say they will not leave one stone upon another. He mentions that in Matthew chapter 24 as well, that you're talking about a complete destruction, and normally If you're gonna crash in a building, you're gonna break down the door, you're gonna look for the people inside or some sort of treasure. You kick down the door, maybe you knock a hole in a wall or two, but that's usually what you're gonna stop at. You wouldn't literally take apart every stone. If you were gonna bulldoze a house, would you take the time to separate all the brick? Who cares, right? There was a rumor, history tells us, among the Roman armor as they looked army. It's going to be one of those nights, I think, that the Jews had hidden their vast treasures in between the stones. And so in the search for this treasure, the Romans literally separate the temple, one stone from another. It's not about treasure or not. It's about this picture of absolute, complete devastation and destruction. This is the city. Now, mind you, this is the city, because at this place in our reading, by the time we got to last week's reading, getting to yesterday, we're in the final week before Jesus' crucifixion. He'll be talking specifically about how he's going to be crucified. I mean, he's very aware of what's going to happen to him in Jerusalem and just outside of Jerusalem. So if you knew there was a town or a community that was going to bring to you this incredible pain and shame and ridicule and all of that, if you knew that this group was really going to hurt you, how would you view them? See, Jerusalem is the place where Jesus will give his life. That's where he'll go through the trial. That's where he'll go through that mockery. That's where he'll be beaten. That's where he'll be scourged, and then he'll be brought outside the city and crucified there on the edge of the city. And what does he do when he sees this group that is this is the capital of God's people. This is where the temple is. This is the center of Israel's spirituality. And so the hypocrisy, the lawlessness, the selfishness is off the charts from what it should be and what it is. So when he sees a people that are this way and are going to treat him that way, what does he do? He weeps for them. I just never really thought about that before, never noticed that before. It's hard for me to imagine how Jesus gave his life for those who were actively insulting him during his dying process. But you really see his heart. Here's a beautiful glimpse of why Jesus is going to die on the cross, is because he cares for them, even those that would hurt him and those that would mock him and those that would ridicule him. If you flip the page, I think it's an interesting contrast, another kind of a jarring passage in Mark chapter 11, about verse 12 or so. If you're reading along in a normal Bible, I should say. So we watch Jesus weep in this compassion and mercy for an ungodly people. And so as he's going in and out of Jerusalem in that so we start to move into that last week, we read the next day they were leaving Bethany outside of Jerusalem. Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. And he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." I'd like to hear how he said it. Now, Mark here gives you a little, and the disciples heard him say it. When you flip the page in our chronological reading, they're going to come back into town, and they're going to see the same tree, and that it's withered, it's dead. And they're going to go, "Whoa, man, wow, Jesus just killed a tree." And Jesus is going to essentially say, "So that impresses you?" I mean, we're 3 years into this, and let's see, we've fed the multitude a couple times, we've walked on the water, we've stilled the storm. We've recently raised Lazarus from the dead, and you're impressed by the tree. Okay, so y'all just keep learning, keep up, try to catch up. But this is one of those kind of jarring passages too, and I always kind of want to see, how Bibles like this one has like a heading, like this is what the paragraph is about, and I always want it to say, Jesus early in the morning before he's had coffee. Because that's how it strikes me at first. It's like, woof. Especially because Mark goes out of his way to say it's not the season for figs. So what's poor tree? That's not fair. And gets killed for not having figs. And so okay, Jesus was hungry, but that's the biblical version of hangry, right? I mean, wow. I have spent years and years puzzling over this verse, and then y'all heard me talk about it before. When we moved to California a number of years, nearly 20 years, more than 20 years ago, we got into a thing about planting all kinds of things, all kinds of plants. And so Root ordered 2 different fig trees, a brown and a turkey, is that right? Mission and a brown, 2 different kinds of fig trees. I'd never been around one. And she ordered them bare root. I don't know if you've ever done that, and it's really depressing when you get them because they send you a stick in the mail. And you're like, well, that was dumb. But you put it in a bucket and you let it sprout and you put it around. Turns out it works. And so we had 2 fig trees. I'd never been around fig trees before. And first of all, I was impressed by the size of the leaves. They're huge leaf. Secondly, as I've mentioned, I was quite disappointed when I had my first fig. I was pretty excited about it. And I found out that a fig tastes nothing like a fig Newton. And that's really disappointing. I was like, bleh. I mean, you know, so... Oh, well, next we just went back to planting steaks after that, but doesn't taste like a fig Newton. The other thing that finally, after all these years, I've read this verse and thought, yeah, I don't know what to do with, I don't know why Jesus is aggravated. We had also planted citrus trees and peach trees, and I think we planted an almond tree. We planted an apricot tree and other things. And spring was always beautiful, especially with peach trees. Peach trees, if you've ever been around one, load up with blossoms. And they can be pink, they can be white, depends on the variety. And around us, a lot of orchards were around us. And there were a lot of peach orchards, and a lot of them were the kind that puts out a white bloom. And in the sort of the later spring, it was almost like it was snowing because the petals had finally let go, and it would be just this constant, it looked like snow, you know, in the air and then on the ground, just beautiful. What you normally see in a fruit tree is, so they go dormant in the winter, and then as spring comes, the little leaves come out, and then you see the little buds where the fruit's going to be, and it blooms a little flower, and then as it's pollinated, then the little flower then turns into the little fruit, whether it's the apple or peach or whatever it is. The fig tree's really different. There may be other trees like this. I haven't taken the time to research it, but the fig tree is unique compared to any of the other trees we had. So the sequence is, out of dormancy in the winter, you have the leaves first come out, and then you have the blossom, and then you have the fruit. Fig tree is a strange thing. It's a really strange wood. It's light and spongy, and it's easy to cut with shears or pruners. But as they come out of the dormancy, the first thing that happens on a fig tree is the little figs come out. And then the leaves, which is backwards than most fruit trees, at least in my experience. So it's leaves, blossom, fruit. With a fig tree, it's figs and then leaves. So it's true that it's not the season for figs, it's too early. But go back and look at the text. Why does Jesus go to this tree when it's too early for figs? Well, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry, seeing in the distance a fig tree in what? In leaf. So for a fig tree sequence, figs first, leaves second, which means if it has leaves, it must then have figs. Now, if that was a peach tree, that's not fair at all because you've got leaves, but you're a long ways from the fruit. But if it's a fig tree, if it's leafed out, it's already bearing fruit. It's also interesting when this happens. This is as Jesus is moving in and out of Jerusalem and entangling with the Jewish leaders, when he's weeping over their hypocrisy and their evil and all of that. So a fig tree that has leaves but no fruit is a lying fig tree. Because if it's leafed out, you can see that from a distance, and you say, hey, and it would have stood out because the other fig trees wouldn't have had leaves yet because it's not the season for figs. So Jesus would have seen it from a distance, and a fig tree from a distance is saying, I have fruit. And so it attracts hungry people. So hungry people go over to eat, only to find out there's nothing there. Yeah, So you go to the temple because your chief priests and Pharisees say what? I have fruit. I have spiritual nourishment. And you get there, and what do you find? Well, they rip you off, right? They rip you off in your money. They rip you off in your sacrifice. They're trading money back and forth. Jesus has to turn over the money tables. You get there, and you find worse than nothing. You certainly leave spiritually hungry rather than filled. It's an interesting thing that in the middle of this conversation, the fig tree out of nowhere becomes a living parable. There's a message much beyond, Jesus was hungry in a bad mood one day. And it's the details. It's one of those fun things about studying the Bible that I've read this for decades and trust it. Okay, I mean, Jesus does things for a reason, but I don't really know what to do with this one. And then along the way somewhere you bump into something and you go, hey, I didn't know that. And something becomes fresh and exciting. And that's why I think Mark says, and his disciples heard him say it. It's a message not just about Jesus' power to kill trees. If you flip the page on page 1444 or Mark 11, verse 20, it says, in the morning as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. I mean, dead. Peter remembered, and he said to Jesus, Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed is withered. Remember, cursed is not the same thing as cussing. Remember, he said, may no one ever eat fruit of it again. That's a biblical punishment. When the disciples saw this, they were amazed. It's okay to be amazed. It's good to be amazed. I'm just kind of surprised they're amazed at this point. And here's the bad part. Here's the interesting part. How did the fig tree wither so quickly? Really? Because Jesus killed it, that's why. Jesus replied, I tell you the truth, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but you can also say to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and it will be done. If you believe, and you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer. And when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive him, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins. And that's how you know, if you'll just be a real Christian, you can do great magic by just praying. That's often how the verse is used, right? Is Jesus saying that if you just have enough faith, then anything happen you want to happen? To my knowledge, no mountains have yet been cast into the sea since Jesus said it. Or maybe they have, and they were originally in Midland because they're gone. Well, that would suggest that in 2,000 years, round numbers, not one single Christian's ever had significant faith to do what Jesus said that we could all do. Not even one of the apostles chunked any mountains into the Mediterranean. So I guess they were insufficient as well. If you understand that the fig tree is a living parable about the claim to righteousness but an emptiness, then there's something more important than physically moving mountains, and that's faith. That's the being fulfilled and being nourished in our relationship with God. This is something that is doable when we ask. If we genuinely seek, we will find. If we genuinely knock, it'll be open to us. Flip over to page 1458. I had the privilege to study with someone a few years ago. They were already a Christian. It was just an opportunity to have fellowship and study and all of that. But it was interesting because in the course of this conversation, I found out this person had been diagnosed with an extremely enlarged heart. They didn't know it. They had been involved in some risky chemicals and things that created that problem, but they didn't realize they had gotten there, and till finally they were getting pretty weak. And I guess as the heart, it's kind of strange to me, but as the heart gets less efficient and gets larger, trying to compensate. And so he finally went in for a doctor's appointment. And have you ever gone in for a test and then you've had to wait weeks for a result? Isn't that irritating? There's only one thing worse than that: when they interrupt a test and get in a hurry. Right? Because when the medical world gets in a hurry, it's because they need to be. And you're like, oh no. So he went in to the doctor and they did a quick test, and they looked at him and they said, we don't know how you walked in here. There's no reasonable explanation for the fact that we're talking to you right now. You shouldn't be here. Don't even know how you walked in here. Well, you know, what can I do? Well, we can make a few adjustments, but I mean, there's not much we can do. And so you need to know that you shouldn't be sitting here talking to us, and you're gonna pop any second. And we hate to have to tell you that. And I don't remember his age exactly. I remember his early 20s or mid 20s, somewhere in that age. Can you imagine getting that kind of news? So then how do you live? What do you do when you walk out of the doctor's office with the understanding that literally the next heartbeat could be your last? So I'm kind of taking this in, and I'm like, wow, and then here's what he said. Because some time had passed, a few years had passed, he'd gotten better and things were more stable now and had a pretty decent prognosis. I'm still kind of reading like I can't imagine that happening. And he said, yeah, and he kind of freaked out the person he was with. He said, yeah, I kind of miss those days, honestly. I said, what? He said, well, I had to make a decision. I had to live in the moment, literally. And he said, I just lived in the presence of God in the moment. I didn't worry. I wasn't anxious. If somebody said my warranty expires in 2 years, And he described living so free and untethered by the normal stresses and anxieties and worries and things of life. And so as he got better, he got worse. As he got better, he started taking on the concerns and issues. And so he was striving to grow spiritually to get to the place where I'm just going to live, as Jesus said, that don't be anxious for tomorrow, for each day has enough trouble of its own. He said, I'm trying to learn how to live again like that, where I'm just living with what God has given me right in front of me. So how would you live if you got the same diagnosis? Or maybe instead of any minute, what if someone said, you've only got 1 day left? I guess we could create that if it was a little more artificial, in the sense of you're being imprisoned and you're going to be executed at sunset tomorrow. That way you kind of know how it's going to end. What do you do your last day? I never thought about it that way until this time when I was reading John 13. Because Jesus knows, he's living his last day. More like the execution example I just used, he knows that what's coming is the cross. So not just, I'm going to die, it's really going to be a hard way going out. So how does he spend his last day? In John 13, verse 1, we read, Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love, this translation says. What a beautiful expression. He showed them the full extent of his love. How does he do that? The next verse. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. So not only do you know it's your last day, but you also know that one of the people that you've poured your heart and life into for the last 3 years, one of a small chosen group of 12 people, you know is going to betray you. Which hurts too, doesn't it? Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So what do? So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. And after that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. How does Jesus spend his last day? Washing feet. I was thinking about, well, let me try to get those things on my bucket list done. I'm in a hurry. I've only got one day. Let me go have the fun, the adventure, the experience, the whatever, because it's my last day. Jesus spends his last day serving, washing nasty feet to show them the full extent of his love for them. Now, they don't get it. They're too busy being freaked out. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand. And sort of to prove his point, Peter says, you shall never wash my feet. If I was Jesus, I'd have said, I said. Because he just said, you don't understand it, so just hush, right, and go with it. Nope, that's not Peter. Peter doesn't hush. Never shall you wash my feet. And Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Then Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. If you're saying, I don't really get what you're saying, but if you're saying that you've got to wash to be a part of you, I really want to be a part of you, so let's just wash everything. Likely, there's some cultural nuances here that's hard for me to understand. We have it a little bit, but not much. They're in a culture that views different parts of the body with different measure of honor. Kind of we do. I mean, feet are stinky, feet are gross, maybe. Okay, that kind of goes. If you get spit on, that's a pretty big insult. That's going to bother us. But they come from this culture that the head's the highest, and you work your way down, and the feet are the lowest. And so there's another layer here that I don't fully grasp, because Jesus is washing feet, and that's so inverted. Remember when before Jesus comes to be baptized by John, John describes Jesus as one whom he is unworthy to untie his sandals, when he's unworthy to touch his feet. That John can't even reach up to the lowest part of Jesus. That's that cultural reference. And then that's what Jesus does, is wash feet. And so part of what's happening to Peter is, in his mindset, he can't comprehend how inverted, how backwards this is. And I wonder if that's part of why, then not just my feet, but my hands and my head, he's trying to move this up. But Jesus answered, a person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you is clean, for he knew who was going to betray him and why he said that not everyone was clean. Nobody else says anything, and I don't blame them. I think even Peter's like, I don't know what that meant. So I'm gonna do what I should have done the first time and just go with it, I think. But when Jesus gets done, and how long does it take to wash 12 men's feet? Is it 3 to 5 minutes? Times 12? So, surely it's at least a half hour. Easily could be an hour. So just soak in the moment, if you will. So it's awkward, and he's like, I don't know. And so Jesus and everybody else is like, well, what's happening? And then Jesus washes his feet. They have this conversation. Peter's like, well, all of me. And Jesus is like, no, your feet's all you need. And then there's got to be this nervous anticipation of I'm next, and I don't know exactly what happened, but I think Peter got in trouble as usual, so I don't want to. And so this goes on, and this moment just sets. It just hangs in the room where nobody's talking, kind of waiting on this really strange, awkward, different experience. When he had finished washing their feet, that was a while. I'd like to visit the Grand Canyon and do that mule ride to the bottom and back. I especially want to ride a mule coming back up, for sure. I've seen the Grand Canyon, I don't know if a half a dozen times, but probably close, 4 or 5, maybe 6 times. I've driven up and I've gotten out and I've said, wow, what a ditch, It's huge. But when you just drive by, you're impressed. But how different would it be if you got up at sunrise and hiked down to the bottom? You can do it in a day if you're in Olympic shape like I am. And so it would take hours, and you'd hike down, and the sun would be coming up, and the light and the shadows would be changing on the walls of the canyon, and the birds and the hawks would be moving, and the temperature would be a little bit chilly, and you'd get down to the river, and you'd see the color, that sort of copper-colored, and maybe you're at a place where it's moving a little bit, and you hear it, and you see it, and you have lunch, and you sit there, and you're like, man, wow, surrounded by all this grandeur and magnificence. And then you start climbing back up, and then you can't breathe. You're trying not to pass out. You're climbing up this hill. You're drinking your water. Maybe the afternoon's passed. The sun is getting to the other side, and you get the colors and shadows and things from the other side. And you've got to stop to rest a lot because other people in your party are not in good a shape as you are, and so you're merciful. And you sit there, and you listen, and you watch, and then you climb, and you get to the top. How different would your appreciation for the Grand Canyon be if you had hiked it versus driven up to the visitor center and looked around and left? Sometimes you have to just soak in it. I don't know how else to say that. For it to really permeate. Which is not how we roll. We're quick, we're fast, we're moving, we're doing, we're accomplishing, we're checking, It's interesting that the last day that Jesus has on earth before his crucifixion, he does something that's odd. He could have just said some things, and he said a lot of things. Not like he doesn't say things. He could have said things. He could have said, y'all need to serve one another. You need to be kind to one another. You need to humble yourself. He could have said things. What he does is do something that takes time. He has precious little time. When he's washing your feet, do you think he just gives them a quick swipe and moves to the next guy and gets that done? He's got 12, right? 20, that's 24 feet, am I right? Probably not, right? He probably takes as much time as each foot needs. Jesus is trying to make a life-changing impression on his disciples. So when he had finished washing their feet, the verse says, chapter 13, verse 12, it's been a while. We've sat in this moment for a while. He put on his clothes, returned to his place, and here's what he says: do you understand what I've done for you? It's interesting, when he has precious little time left, he takes all the time that's needed to wash these feet. Do you understand? He'd already said, you won't understand it now, but you will later. There's kind of two laters. There's a later like now that we're done washing feet, and then there's the later after Jesus is resurrected and ascended back to heaven. But there's a quick later right here. Do you understand what I've done? You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. In the DNA of Christianity is the heart of service. Not a begrudging obedience, but a desire to serve others. A recognition of the value in a fast-paced world, in a hectic community that we live in. We can be reluctant to take the time it takes to serve. Interestingly enough, Jesus says, well, now that you know, you'll be blessed if you do them. The next time that we're anxious and busy and running on fumes and feeling tight inside and overwhelmed by our circumstances, we might pause in that frenzy and ask ourselves, when's the last time I've really served? It could be that the reason that we're not feeling blessed is that we haven't experienced the joy of serving. That's what Jesus says. You're blessed if you do these things. What an amazing God that we serve. He tells them in that setting, the new commandment that he gives to them, gives to us, is that we love one another. And he says, this is how the world will know that you're my disciples, by how you love one another. And what does that look like? A willingness to serve in an unhurried manner. To recognize that that pair of feet in front of you has been placed there by God, and they need all the time in that moment. Blessing, love, and the evidence that we are his. Three things he says about what it means to serve as he did. Jesus never calls us to something that he hasn't first done and will do with us. Tonight we have an opportunity in a simple way to serve one another. That is, if there is any way that we can pray with you or encourage you in any way, if tonight's the night that you want to trust Christ and put on your Lord in Christ in baptism by surrendering to his lordship, then we have time for that. What else do we rush off to do if we're talking about someone experiencing salvation or healing? What else is it that we could have on our schedule besides that? And so we have time. Time to visit, time to encourage, time to pray, time to help in any way that we can. And so we ask tonight if we can help you in any way. We invite you to one of these pews here, or you can visit with an elder there in the foyer on the left. Or maybe it's one of those nights to just turn to a brother and sister that you know and love well and visit with them. For each of us are called as priests, as a nation of priests, that we can lift one another up in the presence of God. If we can encourage you in any way tonight, we invite you to come as together we stand and sing.